Colorado Territory, 1871. The snow-capped Rocky Mountains loomed against the horizon as Samuel O'Malley guided his horse along the windswept trail. At 26, Samuel had already seen more death than most men witness in a lifetime. 3 years as a Union cavalry scout during the war, then another 3 driving cattle across territories where lawmen were scarce and outlaws plenty. His hand instinctively touched the scar that ran across his left forearm, a permanent reminder of the Apache raid that had taken his parents' lives when he was just 17. "The frontier's no place for settling down," Samuel muttered to his horse, Rusty. "Just you and me, boy, that's all we need." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as he approached the outskirts of Willow Creek, a growing settlement nestled in a valley that had sprung up around a silver mining operation. His ranch, modest but his own, lay 10 miles outside town, far enough to keep the world at bay, close enough to sell his horses when necessary. The previous winter's blizzards had decimated half his stock, forcing him to take on work breaking horses for the Rocking W, the largest spread in the county. Samuel adjusted his well-worn Stetson, shielding his eyes from the setting sun. His lean frame carried the strength of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle, though the weight in his eyes spoke of burdens no one his age should carry. He'd learned early that attachments were dangerous in a land where death came swiftly and without warning. Better to rely on himself, keep moving, stay free. "Mr. O'Malley," called Hiram Jenkins, the town's telegraph operator, waving frantically from the boardwalk. "Got a message came for you yesterday." Samuel reined in with a frown. "Message from who?" "Fellow named Judge Thomas Kincaid," Jenkins said, handing over the yellow paper. "From Boston, says it's urgent family business." Samuel's brow furrowed as he read the telegram. "Samuel stop your Uncle William PASSED stop as executor, must inform you of inheritance and urgent family matter stop, arrival Willow Creek, April 3rd with ward stop, require your presence stop, Judge Thomas Kincaid." "April 3rd, Samuel looked up. "That's tomorrow." Jenkins nodded. "Stage is due at noon." Samuel tucked the telegram into his vest pocket. Uncle William, his mother's brother whom he'd met only twice. A wealthy businessman in Boston who'd offered to take Samuel in after the Apache raid. Samuel had refused, choosing instead the freedom of the open range over the confines of Eastern society. What inheritance, he wondered aloud. And who's this ward? The last thing Samuel wanted was entanglement with Eastern relations. His life was here alone just as he preferred it. Attachments meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant pain. The war and the frontier had taught him that lesson with brutal clarity. As Samuel rode toward the saloon for a much-needed whiskey, he couldn't shake the unease settling in his gut. Something was about to change, and change rarely favored men like him. The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another rut in the road, sending Elizabeth Kincaid sprawling against the opposite seat. At 22, with honey-blonde hair tucked beneath a fashionable blue bonnet that matched her traveling suit, Elizabeth maintained a grace that belied the turbulence of both the journey and her life. "Are you quite all right, my dear?" Judge Thomas Kincaid asked, steadying his daughter with a concerned hand. "Yes, father," Elizabeth replied, straightening her skirts, "though I confess I never imagined the West would be quite so jarring." The elderly woman seated beside them snorted. "Child, this is nothing. Wait till you see what passes for civilization out here." Elizabeth offered a polite smile but said nothing. The past 6 months had taught her the value of silence. After her fiancé's betrayal, discovering James with her supposed friend Charlotte mere weeks before their wedding, Elizabeth had retreated into books and solitude. The scandal had rippled through Boston society, leaving her reputation intact but her heart shattered. When her father had been appointed executor of William O'Malley's estate, the opportunity to accompany him west had seemed like providence. A chance to escape the pitying glances, the whispered rumors, the suffocating drawing rooms where everyone knew her shame. "I've received word that Mr. Samuel O'Malley will meet us in Willow Creek," her father said, consulting his pocket watch. "Though I wonder how he'll take the news." Elizabeth nodded absently, her mind on the task ahead. As her father's assistant in legal matters, an unconventional role she'd adopted after her mother's death, she had helped organize the complex details of William O'Malley's will. The conditions attached to Samuel's inheritance were unusual, to say the least. Do you truly believe he'll agree to the terms? She asked. Judge Kincaid sighed. Hard to say. From what his uncle told me, Samuel O'Malley is a solitary man, hardened by war and wilderness. But 5,000 acres and a considerable fortune might persuade even the most independent spirit. And if he refuses, Elizabeth pressed, then the entire estate reverts to charitable causes, and our journey will have been for naught. The judge paused. Except perhaps for the benefit of new surroundings for you, my dear. Elizabeth turned her gaze to the window. The landscape outside was nothing like the manicured gardens and cobblestone streets of Boston. Wild, untamed, vast beyond comprehension, the frontier stretched endlessly, promising both freedom and danger in equal measure. I admit there is something compelling about such openness, she murmured, a place where one might truly start anew. Her father patted her hand. That's my girl. Always seeing the possibility rather than the hardship. If only he knew how desperately she clung to that optimism, how thin it had worn since James's betrayal. The frontier might offer escape, but Elizabeth harbored no illusions about finding happiness here. She had learned the hard way that love was a luxury she could no longer afford. The stagecoach crested a ridge, revealing a small settlement nestled in the valley below. Willow Creek, announced the driver from above. Next stop, 10 minutes. Elizabeth steeled herself for whatever awaited them. After all, they would deliver the news of inheritance, handle the necessary paperwork, and depart within a fortnight. How difficult could it be? Samuel stood on the boardwalk outside the Willow Creek General Store, watching as the stagecoach rumbled down the town's main street in a cloud of dust. He'd spent a restless night pondering the telegram, debating whether to even show up. In the end, curiosity had won out. The coach lurched to a stop before the Frontier Hotel. The driver jumped down to open the door, and Samuel watched as an elderly woman emerged first, followed by a distinguished gentleman in his 60s, dressed in an expensive Eastern suit that looked ridiculously out of place in the dusty Western town. And then she appeared. Samuel had seen beautiful women before, dance hall girls in Dodge City, Southern belles in Tennessee during the war, even the occasional refined lady passing through on her way to San Francisco. But the young woman who stepped down from the coach struck him differently. She wore a fitted blue traveling suit that complemented her slender figure, with honey blonde hair partially visible beneath a fashionable bonnet. Her features were delicate yet strong, her posture perfect as she surveyed the street with what appeared to be cautious curiosity rather than the typical Eastern disdain. The older gentleman spotted Samuel and approached, offering his hand. "You must be Samuel O'Malley, Judge Thomas Kincaid. Your Uncle William spoke highly of you." Samuel shook the offered hand. "Can't imagine why, only met the man twice in my life." The young woman joined them, her gaze direct in a way that surprised Samuel. Most Eastern ladies wouldn't meet a stranger's eyes so boldly. "This is my daughter, Elizabeth Kincaid," the judge said. "She assists me in legal matters." Samuel nodded, tipping his hat. "Ma'am." "Mr. O'Malley," she replied, her voice cultured but without pretension. "I'm sorry for your loss." He shrugged, barely knew him. What's this about an inheritance? Judge Kincaid glanced around the busy street. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private. Our rooms at the hotel, perhaps, after we've had a chance to refresh ourselves from the journey." "Silver Dollar Saloon has a private room in the back," Samuel said. "I'll meet you there in an hour." The judge looked uncomfortable. "I'm not certain that's an appropriate venue for my daughter." "I'll be fine, Father," Elizabeth interjected. "We're in the West now. Conventions must adapt to circumstances." Samuel found himself surprisingly impressed by her practicality. Most Eastern women would have swooned at the suggestion. "1 hour, then," he agreed, tipping his hat again before turning toward the livery stable. He needed to check on his horse and gather his thoughts before whatever news awaited him. An hour later, Samuel sat in the back room of the Silver Dollar, nursing a whiskey as Judge Kincaid explained the situation. "Your Uncle William amassed considerable wealth in railroad investments and timber operations," the judge said. "Having no children of his own, he named you his sole heir." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Why me?" "We weren't close. He followed your military career with interest and admired your independence. He said you reminded him of himself in his younger days." "What's the catch?" Samuel asked bluntly. There's always a catch. Elizabeth, who had been taking notes in a small leather-bound book, looked up. Your perception serves you well, Mr. O'Malley. Judge Kincaid cleared his throat. Your uncle was concerned about your solitary nature. He believed a man needs family, roots. His will stipulates that to inherit his fortune and the 5,000 acres he purchased adjoining your current property, you must marry within 3 months of his death. Samuel nearly choked on his whiskey. Mary, is this some kind of joke? I assure you it is not, the judge said gravely. William O'Malley died 6 weeks ago. You have approximately 6 weeks remaining to fulfill the condition. And if I don't, the entire estate will be divided among various charitable organizations in Boston. Samuel stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This is ridiculous. I'm not getting married for money or land. The choice is entirely yours, Judge Kincaid said. We're simply here to convey the terms and execute the will according to your decision. Samuel turned to Elizabeth, who had watched the exchange with quiet intensity. Did you know your father was bringing you to the middle of nowhere to deliver this absurd proposition? Her cheeks colored slightly, but her gaze remained steady. I am here as my father's legal assistant, Mr. O'Malley, not as a prospective bride, if that's what you're implying. Something in her composed response caught Samuel off guard. There was a hint of pain behind her dignified demeanor, a familiar armor he recognized all too well. How long will you be staying in Willow Creek? He asked, suddenly curious about this unusual woman. 2 weeks, Judge Kincaid answered. Time enough to handle the necessary paperwork regardless of your decision. Samuel drained his whiskey. I'll think about it, but don't expect me to suddenly propose to some local girl just for money. As he headed for the door, Elizabeth's voice stopped him. Your uncle's intention wasn't to manipulate you, Mr. O'Malley. From what I understand of his correspondence, he genuinely believed you needed something he never had, a family to share his fortune with. Samuel looked back at her. Some things aren't meant to be shared, Miss Kincaid, especially out here. As he stepped into the afternoon sunlight, Samuel couldn't shake Elizabeth's words, or the strange feeling that his carefully constructed solitude had just been fundamentally challenged. The next morning, Elizabeth woke early, eager to explore Willow Creek before beginning the day's legal work. The frontier town was nothing like Boston, but it possessed a raw vitality that she found oddly refreshing after the stifling conformity of Eastern society. She made her way down the hotel stairs in a practical day dress of lavender cotton, her hair arranged in a simple chignon. The dining room was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few miners heading to their shifts and, to her surprise, Samuel O'Malley, seated alone by the window. Elizabeth hesitated. Propriety dictated she should avoid dining alone with an unmarried man, but Western pragmatism suggested such conventions were impractical here. After a moment's consideration, she approached his table. Good morning, Mr. O'Malley. May I join you? He looked up, clearly surprised to see her. Miss Kincaid. He stood politely, gesturing to the chair opposite his. Please. As she settled across from him, Elizabeth noted details she'd missed in yesterday's encounter. His eyes were a striking blue, contrasting with his sun-bronzed skin and dark hair. Despite his frontier life, there was an intelligence in his gaze that spoke of a man who observed more than he revealed. You're up early, he remarked as the waitress brought Elizabeth coffee. I've always preferred mornings, she replied, and I wanted to see your town properly before becoming entangled in legal documents. It's not my town, Samuel corrected. I only come in when necessary. You prefer your ranch. I prefer solitude. Elizabeth studied him over her coffee cup. That must be lonely. Lonely and alone aren't the same thing, Miss Kincaid. The simple statement struck Elizabeth deeply. After James's betrayal, she'd been surrounded by people yet profoundly lonely. Perhaps you're right, she conceded, though I wonder if the distinction matters when the result feels the same. Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps at her candor. Your father sent you to persuade me, he asked abruptly. Elizabeth set down her cup. My father doesn't send me to do anything, Mr. O'Malley. I'm here because legal documentation requires attention to detail and because, she hesitated, then decided on honesty, because Boston held too many painful memories after a recent disappointment. Samuel studied her, seeming to weigh her words. Seems we both appreciate direct speech, Miss Kincaid, so I'll be direct. I have no intention of marrying anyone, regardless of the inheritance. That's certainly your prerogative. But, he prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification in her tone. But I wonder if you might at least review the full terms of the inheritance before dismissing it entirely. The land adjoining yours is quite valuable, with water rights that could transform your operation. Samuel leaned back in his chair. You've studied the details closely. It's my job, she replied simply. Father is handling another matter this morning. I could show you the survey maps and water rights documentation if you're interested. After a moment's consideration, Samuel nodded. I suppose it couldn't hurt to look, though it won't change my mind. An hour later, they sat in the hotel's small private parlor, maps and documents spread across a table between them. Elizabeth watched as Samuel examined the survey of his uncle's property, his expression thoughtful. This creek runs year-round? He asked, tracing the blue line with his finger. According to the surveys, yes. Your uncle had engineers assess the property thoroughly before purchase. Samuel shook his head. Why would he buy land adjoining mine when we barely knew each other? Elizabeth hesitated, then reached for a leather portfolio. Perhaps this will explain. She removed a letter and handed it to him. Your uncle wrote this shortly before his death. It was to be given to you along with the will. Samuel took the letter hesitantly, unfolding the heavy stationery. As he read, his expression shifted from skepticism to something more complex. When he finished, he carefully refolded the paper and stared out the window for several long moments. He watched from afar, Samuel finally said, his voice rough. All these years. Elizabeth nodded. Your uncle respected your decision to remain in the West rather than return to Boston after your parents' deaths, but he followed your life through contacts and investigators. He was proud of you. Proud enough to try manipulating me from beyond the grave, Samuel said, though the bitterness had lessened in his tone. I believe he was trying to give you a choice, Elizabeth said gently. Between continuing as you are or building something more. Samuel met her gaze. Did you lose someone during the war? The abrupt change of subject startled her. My brother Andrew at Gettysburg. Samuel nodded. I was there. Cavalry scout, saw things no man should see. Is that why you choose to be alone? His jaw tightened. I choose it because attachments are dangerous out here. People die, Miss Kincaid, they leave or they betray you. Better not to form the attachments in the first place. The words hit uncomfortably close to her own recent conclusion about love and trust. Elizabeth gathered the documents, needing a moment to compose herself. Perhaps we're not so different, Mr. O'Malley, she said quietly. Though our circumstances vary considerably. Something in her tone made him study her more carefully. Your disappointment in Boston, a man. Elizabeth stiffened. That's rather personal. You've been reading my uncle's private thoughts about me, he countered. Seems only fair. After a moment's hesitation, Elizabeth nodded. Yes, a broken engagement, rather publicly and humiliatingly broken, I'm afraid. Samuel's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. As am I. But it taught me a valuable lesson about trusting too easily. She gathered her portfolio and stood. The documents will remain available for your review. My father and I have rooms 3 and 4 should you have questions. As she reached the door, Samuel's voice stopped her. Miss Kincaid. She turned, yes. Would you care to see my ranch? Tomorrow, perhaps, since you're interested in the adjoining property. The invitation surprised them both, judging by the slight widening of his eyes after the words left his mouth. I would like that, Elizabeth replied, equally surprised by her answer. Thank you. As she walked upstairs to her room, Elizabeth wondered what had possessed her to accept. The last thing she needed was to form any attachment in this remote place, especially to a man as complicated and wounded as Samuel O'Malley. Yet something about him called to her. Perhaps it was the familiar pain she recognized in his eyes, or the independence he guarded so fiercely. Whatever it was, Elizabeth sensed that tomorrow's visit would be more consequential than either of them intended. Dawn broke clear and cool as Samuel saddled his horse outside the Willow Creek livery. He'd spent a restless night questioning his impulsive invitation to Elizabeth Kincaid. What had he been thinking? He avoided entanglements of any kind, especially with Eastern women who would inevitably return east. Yet there had been something in her composed manner, in the quiet dignity with which she'd acknowledged her own painful past, that had resonated with him. She didn't seem to expect anything from him, a refreshing change from most people he encountered. "Mr. O'Malley." Samuel turned to find Elizabeth approaching, and momentarily lost his train of thought. She wore a simple riding habit of forest green that complemented her honey-blonde hair, which was fastened in a practical braid. Unlike most Eastern ladies who visited the frontier, she wore no frills or impractical ornamentation. "Miss Kincaid," he tipped his hat, "I've arranged a mount for you." "Thank you," she gestured to a small leather satchel. "I brought some additional documents regarding the water rights I thought might interest you." Always the professional, Samuel thought, oddly disappointed. Of course. The livery owner let out a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "This is Daisy. Smoothest gait in the county." Elizabeth approached the horse confidently, stroking her neck before checking the saddle girth and stirrup length. Samuel raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "You ride?" he asked. "Since childhood," she replied, "though I suspect Western riding differs considerably from Boston's manicured bridle paths." Samuel helped her mount, noting her firm seat and straight posture. Perhaps this wouldn't be the ordeal he'd anticipated after his restless night. They rode out of town at an easy pace, the spring morning crisp and invigorating. Samuel found himself pointing out landmarks as they traveled, the distant mountain passes, the creek that fed into the larger river, the stands of pine that marked the transition to higher elevation. "It's beautiful," Elizabeth said as they crested a rise that offered a panoramic view of the valley. "So vast compared to the east." "That's what drew me here after the war," Samuel admitted. "After the carnage at Gettysburg and the other battlefields, I needed space, room to breathe without bumping into another soul." "I understand the appeal," Elizabeth said softly, "though I imagine it comes with its own challenges. Winters are harsh, supplies can run short, nearest doctor is 2 days' ride." He glanced at her. "Not the life most Eastern women would choose." "Perhaps not. But I find there's something honest about such challenges. They're straightforward, unlike the social battlefields of Boston drawing rooms." Samuel chuckled. "I doubt many society ladies would see it that way." "I'm not most society ladies, Mr. O'Malley." The simple statement hung between them as they continued riding, crossing a shallow stream and ascending a gentle slope. As they reached the crest, Samuel reined in. "There it is. My place." Below them sprawled a modest ranch nestled against the foothills. A sturdy log cabin sat central to the property, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged nearby. A small herd of horses grazed in a meadow and smoke curled from the cabin's chimney. "You have someone watching your property?" Elizabeth asked, noting the smoke. "My ranch hand, Hank." "Old buffalo hunter who decided he preferred horses to sleeping on the ground. Keeps things running when I'm away." They rode down to the ranch, where an elderly man with a white beard emerged from the barn to greet them. "Sam. Wasn't expecting you back so soon." His eyes widened at the sight of Elizabeth, and with company no less. "Miss Elizabeth Kincaid, this is Hank Peterson," Samuel introduced them. "Hank, Miss Kincaid, and her father are here about my uncle's will." "Pleased to meet you, ma'am," Hank said, tipping his hat. "Don't often see ladies out this way, especially not ones who can sit a horse proper." Elizabeth smiled. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Peterson." Samuel dismounted and helped Elizabeth down, though she clearly needed little assistance. "I'll show you the property line that adjoins my uncle's land," Samuel said. "We can have lunch afterward." As they walked toward the eastern boundary of his property, Samuel found himself studying Elizabeth from the corner of his eye. She moved with a grace that seemed natural rather than affected, asking thoughtful questions about the operation of the ranch and the quality of the grazing land. "Your uncle's property begins just beyond that ridge," Samuel explained, pointing to a distant rise. "According to your maps, it extends 15 miles eastward and includes the headwaters of the creek that runs through my land." "Yes, that's what makes it particularly valuable," Elizabeth said. Together, the properties would control water access for the entire valley. Samuel frowned. "I never wanted to control anything beyond what I need to survive." Yet you built this ranch yourself, Elizabeth observed. That requires ambition of a sort. Independence isn't ambition, Miss Kincaid. It's necessity. Perhaps, or perhaps it's fear disguised as self-reliance. Samuel stopped walking, surprised by her forthright challenge. You don't mince words, do you? I've found life is too short for unnecessary pretense, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Especially after watching my brother die for a cause he believed in, while I was expected to simply carry on with socially acceptable behaviors regardless of my true feelings. The pain in her voice was raw despite her composed expression. Samuel recognized in that moment that Elizabeth Kincaid's proper exterior concealed depths he hadn't anticipated. Your broken engagement, he said carefully. It wasn't just disappointment, was it? Elizabeth looked away, toward the distant mountains. No, it was betrayal in its most fundamental form, my fiancé with my closest friend in our family's garden 2 weeks before our wedding. She took a deep breath. The entire incident became fodder for Boston gossip. I was the object of pity, which is somehow worse than being the object of scorn. Samuel stood silent, unsure how to respond to such honesty. I apologize, Elizabeth said, composing herself. That was inappropriately personal. No, Samuel found himself saying. It wasn't inappropriate, it was real. He gestured toward a flat rock overlooking the valley. Shall we sit? The view is worth it. They settled on the sun-warmed stone, the vast landscape spread before them. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, the spring breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. My parents were killed by Apache when I was 17, Samuel finally said. I'd gone to the creek to fish, heard the screams from half a mile away. By the time I got back, the raid was over, the house burning. My father was already dead, my mother, he swallowed hard. She died in my arms. Elizabeth's hand moved as if to touch his, then withdrew. I'm so sorry. After that, I drifted, worked cattle drives, broke horses. When the war came, I enlisted, figured I might as well put my riding skills to use as a scout. He stared at the horizon, saw things during those years that haunted me, still do. When it ended, I knew I couldn't go back east like my uncle wanted. Needed open spaces, few people, and work that made sense. And you found that here. Samuel nodded, built this place over 5 years. It's not much, but it's mine. No one to disappoint, no one to lose, no one to leave me. A fortress against pain, Elizabeth observed quietly. The insight struck uncomfortably close to the truth. Samuel looked at her with new understanding. Is that what Boston society is for you now? A fortress? She smiled sadly. A prison, perhaps, when I was escaping, even temporarily, by accompanying my father west. They fell silent again, each contemplating the other's revelations. Samuel found himself strangely relieved to have spoken of his parents' deaths, something he rarely mentioned to anyone. We should head back, he said eventually. Hank will have lunch ready. As they walked toward the cabin, Samuel realized with some surprise that he was actually enjoying Elizabeth's company. Her directness, intelligence, and lack of pretension made conversation easy despite their different backgrounds. Hank had indeed prepared a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and freshly baked bread. They ate at the rough-hewn table in the cabin's main room, the conversation flowing more naturally than Samuel would have expected. This stew is excellent, Mr. Peterson, Elizabeth complimented. Far better than what they're serving at the hotel. Hank beamed. Secrets in the herbs, ma'am. Wild sage and thyme from the hillside. After lunch, Samuel showed Elizabeth the rest of the ranch. The spring-fed well that provided water year-round, the vegetable garden Hank maintained, the corral where he broke horses for sale to the army and local ranchers. You've built something remarkable here, Elizabeth said as they prepared to ride back to town. A place that truly sustains itself. It's enough for me, Samuel replied, though for the first time he found himself questioning whether that was entirely true. As they mounted their horses for the return journey, a flash of movement on the ridge caught Samuel's attention. He tensed, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. What is it? Elizabeth asked, noting his sudden alertness. Probably nothing, he said, though his hand moved closer to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Thought I saw riders on the ridge. Neighbors. Don't have neighbors that direction. Samuel relaxed slightly when no further movement appeared. Could be travelers or maybe just deer. But as they rode back toward town, Samuel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that they'd been watched. The frontier held dangers beyond isolation and harsh weather, dangers he'd been foolish to expose Elizabeth to without proper precaution. Yet as he glanced at her riding confidently beside him, Samuel had to admit that Elizabeth Kincaid was not the delicate Eastern flower he'd initially assumed. She'd faced her own battles, albeit of a different kind, and showed a strength of character that impressed him. It was that thought, more than the potential danger on the ridge, that troubled Samuel as they rode toward Willow Creek in the golden light of late afternoon. For the first time in years, he found himself drawn to another person, the very complication he'd structured his entire life to avoid. 3 days later, Elizabeth sat across from her father in their hotel room, reviewing paperwork for another of his cases while trying not to think about her day at Samuel's ranch. She'd been uncharacteristically candid with him, sharing personal pain she typically kept closely guarded. More unsettling was how natural it had felt to confide in him. "You're distracted today," Judge Kincaid observed, peering over his spectacles. "Something troubling you about the Mendez land claim." Elizabeth set down her pen. "No, the documentation is quite straightforward. I was just thinking." "About Samuel O'Malley, perhaps?" her father asked with gentle perception. "Hank Peterson mentioned at the general store that you visited the ranch." "News travels quickly in small towns," Elizabeth sighed. "Yes, I showed Mr. O'Malley the survey maps of his uncle's property. He seemed genuinely surprised by the extent of the water rights." "And did he give any indication of his intentions regarding the inheritance conditions?" "He remains opposed to the marriage requirement," Elizabeth replied, trying to keep her tone professional. "Though I believe he's at least considering the value of the property itself." Judge Kincaid studied his daughter. "You've formed an impression of him." It wasn't a question, but Elizabeth answered anyway. "He's not what I expected. There's depth to him, intelligence. The solitude he maintains seems less about misanthropy and more about self-preservation." "Not unlike someone else I know," her father commented pointedly. Elizabeth busied herself organizing papers. "I don't know what you mean." "Elizabeth," her father's voice softened. "Since James's betrayal, you've retreated from society almost completely. Your assistance with my legal work, while valuable, has also provided convenient excuse to avoid social engagements, potential suitors, even old friends who had nothing to do with the scandal." "I prefer meaningful work to empty social rituals," she countered. "Perhaps, or perhaps, like Samuel O'Malley, you've decided that isolation is safer than risking your heart again." The observation hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Elizabeth stood and walked to the window, watching the activity on Willow Creek's main street. "What would you have me do, Father? Throw myself back into society's marriage market, trust blindly again?" "I would have you live, my dear, not merely exist." He joined her at the window. "You know, watching you with the O'Malley case documents, I'm reminded again what a fine legal mind you have. Had you been born male, you would have made an exceptional attorney." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "An impossible hypothetical." "Perhaps not entirely," her father mused. "The frontier has different rules. Women vote in Wyoming territory now. They own businesses, act as postmasters. The rigid structures of Boston society hold less sway here." Elizabeth turned to her father in surprise. "Are you suggesting I should remain in the West?" "I'm suggesting you consider all possibilities," he replied, "including those that might seem unconventional or even frightening." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Judge Kincaid crossed the room to answer it, revealing Samuel O'Malley standing in the hallway, hat in hand. "Mr. O'Malley," the judge greeted him, "this is an unexpected pleasure." "Judge Kincaid," Samuel nodded, then his eyes found Elizabeth. "Miss Kincaid, I apologize for the intrusion." "Not at all," Elizabeth said, suddenly conscious of her slightly disheveled appearance after hours of paperwork. "Please come in." Samuel stepped into the room, his tall frame making the hotel accommodation seem smaller. He wore clean clothes, a sign he'd made an effort before coming to town, though his expression was troubled. "I've been reviewing the inheritance documents," he said without preamble, "and I've reached a decision. I'll accept the property but decline the financial bequest. The marriage condition is simply not something I can fulfill." Judge Kincaid frowned. I'm afraid that's not possible under the terms of the will. The inheritance is indivisible. The property and financial assets come together, with the same condition attached to both. Samuel's jaw tightened. There's no legal way around it. None that would withstand challenge, the judge confirmed. Your uncle was quite explicit. Samuel paced to the window, his frustration evident. The water rights alone would make my ranch viable long-term, double my herd size, expand into cattle instead of just horses. Then perhaps you should reconsider the condition, Elizabeth suggested quietly. Samuel turned to her, his expression complex. Find a bride in 6 weeks, you mean? A business arrangement with some local woman desperate enough to marry a man who can't offer what a husband should. And what should a husband offer, Mr. O'Malley? Elizabeth asked, genuinely curious. Companionship, protection, a genuine attachment. His gaze held hers, not a cold-blooded contract for financial gain. Elizabeth felt an unexpected warmth at his answer. Despite his protestations against marriage, Samuel held a surprisingly romantic view of the institution itself. Judge Kincaid cleared his throat. There is another aspect of your uncle's will I've not yet mentioned. A letter addressed to you, but with instructions that it only be delivered if you expressed serious consideration of the inheritance. He retrieved a sealed envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Samuel, who broke the wax seal with obvious reluctance. As he read, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock. This can't be right, he finally said, looking up from the letter. What does it say? Elizabeth asked. Samuel handed her the letter. Read it yourself. Elizabeth took the page, immediately recognizing William O'Malley's handwriting from the many documents they'd reviewed. My dear nephew. If you are reading this, you have at least considered accepting your inheritance despite the condition I've attached. I commend your practical wisdom. What you don't yet know is that I've taken the liberty of suggesting a specific bride. Judge Kincaid's daughter, Elizabeth. I've known Thomas for 30 years and have watched his daughter grow into a woman of intelligence, character, and quiet strength. Recent events in Boston have left her wounded in ways I believe you would understand. You are both survivors, Samuel, both guarding yourselves against further pain. Perhaps together you might find something neither expected to discover in this life. Healing through shared understanding. The choice remains entirely yours, but know that I have not suggested this match lightly or without considerable thought, with deepest affection and hope. Your Uncle William. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she finished reading. She looked up to find Samuel watching her intently. Did you know about this? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. No, she whispered, genuinely shocked. I had no idea. Judge Kincaid stepped forward. I was aware of William's wishes, yes. He approached me before his death, explained his intentions. I agreed to present the opportunity should circumstances warrant it, but only if genuine connection seemed possible between you. And this journey west, Samuel demanded. Was it all an elaborate matchmaking scheme? I came to execute William's will, as was my legal obligation, the judge replied steadily, and to give my daughter respite from painful circumstances. Nothing more was guaranteed or expected. Elizabeth found her voice. Father, I cannot believe you would. I would what? He interrupted gently. Bring you to a place where you might meet a man of integrity and character. Allow the possibility of connection without Boston society's judgmental gaze. Yes, I admit to hoping you might find something worth considering here. Elizabeth felt a complex tangle of emotions, embarrassment, anger at being managed, yet also a strange sense of possibility she hadn't anticipated. Samuel's expression had hardened. I don't appreciate being manipulated, Judge Kincaid, by you or my uncle. No manipulation was intended, Mr. O'Malley, the judge replied calmly. Merely opportunity. The choice has always been, and remains, entirely yours. A heavy silence filled the room. Elizabeth finally broke it, her voice quiet but firm. I believe I need some air, she said, gathering her shawl. If you'll excuse me. Neither man moved to stop her as she walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Elizabeth descended the hotel stairs and stepped onto the boardwalk, drawing deep breaths of the cool evening air. Her mind raced with implications. Had she been merely a pawn in her father's and William O'Malley's schemes? Or was there genuine concern behind their actions, More unsettling was her own reaction, not outright rejection of the idea, but a complicated mixture of caution and curiosity. In the 4 days since meeting Samuel O'Malley, Elizabeth had found herself drawn to his straightforward nature, his quiet strength, the intelligence behind his frontier pragmatism. Their conversations had flowed with surprising ease, revealing complementary minds despite their different backgrounds. But marriage, to a man she'd just met, it seemed absurd regardless of the substantial inheritance involved. Elizabeth walked without direction, eventually finding herself at the edge of town where the boardwalk ended and the open country began. The setting sun painted the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple, a beauty so different from Boston's cultivated gardens. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Samuel approached, his expression still troubled but no longer angry. "Your father is concerned," he said, stopping several feet away. "Sent me to make sure you're all right." "I'm perfectly fine," Elizabeth replied. "Simply needed to think without being observed." Samuel nodded. "I understand the feeling." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunset. "I want you to know I had no part in this arrangement," Elizabeth finally said, "and I have no expectation that you would consider such a preposterous suggestion." Samuel studied her face in the fading light. "Is it so preposterous?" The question hung between them, unexpected and charged with possibility. "We barely know each other," Elizabeth said, though it felt like a hollow objection even to her own ears. "True," Samuel agreed. "Yet I feel I know you better after 4 days than people I've encountered repeatedly for years." Elizabeth couldn't deny the same was true for her. Even so, marriage is a practical institution on the frontier, Samuel finished for her. Partnerships based on mutual respect and shared goals are common here. Many start with less acquaintance than we have. Elizabeth blinked in surprise. "Are you actually considering this?" Samuel ran a hand through his hair, looking almost as startled by the turn of the conversation as she felt. "I'm considering possibilities," he admitted. "The inheritance would secure my ranch's future. Your legal knowledge would be valuable for managing the expanded property. And you," he hesitated, then continued more quietly, "you strike me as someone who sees the world clearly without illusion." "I respect that." "Those are practical considerations," Elizabeth observed. "But marriage is more than a business arrangement, Mr. O'Malley." "Samuel," he corrected, "if we're discussing this madness, you should use my given name." "Samuel," she amended, the name feeling strangely intimate. "Marriage should involve affection, compatibility, mutual aims. And those develop with time and shared experience," he countered. "At least, that's what I've observed in the successful partnerships out here." Elizabeth studied him, trying to discern his true thoughts behind the pragmatic frontier logic. "Are you actually proposing to me, Samuel O'Malley?" He looked momentarily taken aback, then a slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I suppose I am in my rather clumsy way." He stepped closer. "Not because of my uncle's will or your father's hopes, but because in 4 days you've made me question assumptions I've held for years about solitude and connection." The simple honesty of his statement touched Elizabeth deeply. Still, caution born of painful experience held her back. "I would need time," she said carefully, "to consider such a significant decision." Samuel nodded. "Of course, there's no rush beyond the inheritance deadline, and even that is secondary to making the right choice." As they walked back toward the hotel in the gathering twilight, Elizabeth felt a strange combination of trepidation and hope. The prospect of remaining in this wild country, building something meaningful alongside a man who understood loss as she did, held an appeal she couldn't have anticipated when boarding the stagecoach in Boston. Whether that appeal would withstand careful consideration remained to be seen. But for the first time since James's betrayal, Elizabeth found herself contemplating a future that wasn't defined by what she'd lost, but by what might yet be found. The next morning, Samuel rode toward town with a sense of unreality. Had he actually proposed marriage to Elizabeth Kincaid? The rational part of his mind insisted he'd lost all sense, yet he couldn't entirely regret the impulsive suggestion. There was something about Elizabeth that called to him, her directness, her quiet strength, the intelligence that assessed situations with clarity unclouded by sentimentality. In many ways, she reminded him of the frontier itself. Beautiful but not delicate, complex beneath the surface, resilient in the face of hardship. As he approached the ridge overlooking Willow Creek, movement in the trees to his left made him rein in sharply. 3 riders emerged onto the trail, blocking his path. Samuel's hand moved instinctively toward his revolver, then stilled as he recognized the leader. "Malone," he acknowledged coldly. "You're a long way from your usual territory." Frank Malone smiled unpleasantly. His weathered face bore the scars of numerous fights, and his reputation as a land grabber was well known throughout the county. "O'Malley," Malone greeted. "Heard you might be coming into some property. Thought we should have a friendly chat about it." "Nothing to discuss," Samuel replied, keeping his tone neutral while assessing the 3 men. All were armed, their horses positioned to block any easy escape. "The land's not mine yet." "But it will be," Malone said, "unless you're planning to let all that fine creek water and grazing land slip through your fingers. Word travels fast about that uncle of yours and his interesting will." Samuel cursed inwardly. He should have known the terms of the inheritance wouldn't remain private in a town the size of Willow Creek. "My business is my own, Malone." "Not entirely," Malone countered, his voice hardening. "That land you're fixing to inherit sits mighty close to my new claims. Water rights from those headwaters would mean a great deal to my operation." "Then you should have purchased it when it was available," Samuel said, growing impatient. "Now if you'll excuse me." As he nudged his horse forward, one of Malone's men moved to block him more directly. "Don't be hasty, O'Malley," Malone said. "I'm prepared to offer you a fair price for those water rights once they're yours, of course. Save you the trouble of finding a bride in the bargain." So that was it. Malone wanted the water rights and had clearly heard about the marriage condition. "Not interested," Samuel said flatly. Malone's expression darkened. "You might want to reconsider. Frontier's a dangerous place. Accidents happen, even to pretty Eastern ladies who don't know the territory." The thinly veiled threat against Elizabeth sent a surge of cold anger through Samuel. Threatening a judge's daughter would be extremely unwise, Malone. "No threats," Malone said, raising his hands in mock innocence. "Just friendly advice about the dangers of frontier life. Judge won't be here forever, will he?" "Neither will his daughter unless something keeps her here." Samuel's jaw tightened. This conversation is over. He guided his horse around the men, his back tense with the expectation of violence, but Malone merely laughed. "Think about my offer, O'Malley. I'll be in touch." Samuel rode toward town, deeply troubled. Frank Malone wasn't known for idle threats. If he wanted the water rights badly enough, he might indeed resort to intimidation or worse. The prospect of danger to Elizabeth added an unexpected urgency to Samuel's considerations. His initial proposal had been impulsive, driven by a surprising connection he hadn't anticipated. Now practical concerns reinforced the idea. Elizabeth might actually be safer as his wife, protected by his name and his gun, than as a visitor vulnerable to Malone's machinations. When Samuel reached the hotel, he found Elizabeth in the small reading room adjoining the lobby, a law book open before her. She looked up as he entered, her expression warming slightly. "Good morning, Samuel," she said, using his given name with a hint of self-consciousness that he found unexpectedly endearing. "Elizabeth." He removed his hat, suddenly aware of his trail-dusty appearance. "May I join you?" She gestured to the chair across from her. "Of course, though you seem troubled." Samuel sat, choosing his words carefully. "I encountered Frank Malone on the trail into town. He's a local rancher with a reputation for expanding his holdings by any means necessary." Elizabeth's brow furrowed. What did he want? "He's heard about my inheritance, including the water rights and the conditions attached. Offered to buy the water rights once they're mine." "I take it you declined." Yes, he didn't appreciate the refusal. Samuel leaned forward. "Elizabeth," he made veiled threats. "Against you." Her eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I see. Do you believe he's truly dangerous?" "Yes," Samuel said without hesitation. "He's burned out smaller ranchers, intimidated homesteaders. The law in this county is stretched thin, and Malone knows it." Elizabeth closed her book, her expression thoughtful. "And you're telling me this because you deserve to know the situation fully before considering my proposal." Samuel replied honestly. There's more at stake now than inheritance or personal considerations. You believe I would be safer as your wife? Yes. My name carries some weight in this territory, so does my gun. Samuel met her gaze directly. But I won't use danger to pressure you into a decision. If you wish to return to Boston immediately, I'll ensure you and your father travel safely to the stage depot in Laramie. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment. You're a surprisingly honorable man, Samuel O'Malley. Not surprising to me, he said with the ghost of a smile, just doing what's right. And what do you believe is right in this situation? Samuel considered the question carefully. I believe that the connection between us, however unexpected, deserves exploration rather than abandonment. I believe my uncle saw something in both of us that we might not have recognized ourselves. And I believe that together we might build something worthwhile on that land, something that honors his vision while creating our own. Elizabeth's expression softened. That's quite different from the practical frontier marriage you described yesterday. Perhaps I've been reconsidering my position on such matters, Samuel admitted. As have I, Elizabeth said quietly. I spoke with my father at length last night. He apologized for not being entirely forthcoming about William O'Malley's hopes. But he also reminded me that I came west seeking something I couldn't find in Boston. And what was that? A place where I might be valued for my mind rather than my social standing. Where the pain of betrayal might fade in the face of new purpose. She met his gaze steadily. I believe I may have found that, Samuel, not just in the West itself, but in the possibilities you represent. Samuel felt an unexpected surge of emotion at her words. Are you saying yes to my proposal? I'm saying, Elizabeth replied carefully, that I accept the possibility of our marriage with certain conditions. Name them, Samuel said, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. First, we proceed with a proper engagement period of at least 2 weeks, during which we continue to become better acquainted. Elizabeth enumerated the points with practical precision. Second, you accept my assistance in legal matters pertaining to the ranch and inheritance. Third, we develop a written agreement regarding my role in the management of our combined properties. Our combined properties, Samuel repeated, appreciating her forthright approach. You drive a careful bargain, Miss Kincaid. I prefer clarity to misunderstanding, Mr. O'Malley. A smile touched her lips. Do you find my terms acceptable? I do, he said, the traditional response resonating with unexpected significance. Though I would add one condition of my own. Which is? That we acknowledge this arrangement begins as practical, but remains open to deeper attachment should it develop naturally between us. Elizabeth's cheeks colored slightly. That seems reasonable. Then we have an agreement. Samuel hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. Her fingers were slender but strong, fitting naturally within his larger grasp. I never expected this when I received that telegram. Nor I when boarding the stagecoach in Boston, Elizabeth admitted. Yet here we are. The simple truth of her statement settled between them, comfortable in its acknowledgement of their unusual circumstances. I should speak with your father, Samuel said, reluctantly releasing her hand. Yes, Elizabeth nodded, though I should warn you he may be more pleased by this development than propriety would suggest. Samuel smiled. I'm beginning to think your father and my uncle understood us better than we understood ourselves. As he left to find Judge Kincaid, Samuel reflected on the dramatic shift in his worldview over the past week. His carefully constructed solitude had been challenged, then cracked, by Elizabeth's unexpected arrival. Where he had seen only danger and attachment, he now glimpsed possibility. Whether that possibility would develop into something deeper remained to be seen. But for the first time since his parents' deaths, Samuel O'Malley found himself looking toward the future with something approaching hope. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word of Samuel and Elizabeth's engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek, generating gossip and speculation in equal measure. Judge Kincaid had indeed been pleased, offering his blessing with barely contained satisfaction at the match his old friend had envisioned. Elizabeth found herself surprisingly content with the arrangement. Each day spent in Samuel's company reinforced her initial impression of his character. Steadfast, intelligent, and possessing an integrity rare in any society, Eastern or Western. Their conversations ranged from practical ranch management to literature, politics, and personal philosophies, revealing a compatibility that transcended their different backgrounds. Today, they rode along the boundary between Samuel's ranch and what would soon be their combined property. The spring air was crisp with morning coolness, the landscape vibrant with wildflowers and new growth. "The survey indicates a natural dam site here," Samuel explained, pointing to where the creek narrowed between rocky outcroppings. "With some work, we could create a reservoir for dry seasons, double the irrigated acreage." Elizabeth nodded, appreciating both the practical insight and his use of "we" rather than "I" when discussing future plans. "The water rights documentation would support such an improvement," she confirmed, "though we should file the appropriate notices with the territorial authorities to prevent any challenges from downstream users." Samuel smiled at her legal precision. "You've studied the water laws thoroughly." It seemed prudent, given their importance to the property's value. Elizabeth returned his smile. "My father has been quite impressed with my dedication to Western territorial statutes." "As am I," Samuel guided his horse closer to hers. "You continue to surprise me, Elizabeth." "In good ways, I hope." "In the best ways," he confirmed, his gaze warm. Over the past fortnight, their interactions had developed an easy familiarity, punctuated by moments of deeper connection that hinted at possibilities beyond their practical arrangement. Samuel had remained respectful, never presuming upon their engagement, yet Elizabeth had noticed his increasing comfort with small gestures. A hand at her elbow, fingers brushing when passing documents, the softening in his expression when she entered a room. "The wedding is in 3 days," Elizabeth observed, a slight nervousness coloring her voice despite her efforts at composure. "Are your arrangements complete?" "Hank has transformed the ranch house beyond recognition," Samuel confirmed. "New curtains, freshly whitewashed walls, furniture polished until it gleams. I hardly recognize the place." "He seems quite invested in our comfort." "In yours, certainly," Samuel chuckled. "He informed me yesterday that a real lady deserves better than my bachelor accommodations, then presented me with a list of improvements he deemed essential." Elizabeth laughed. "I've grown quite fond of Mr. Peterson. His practical wisdom reminds me of my grandfather." They continued riding, discussing plans for expanding the horse breeding operation and possibly adding cattle once the water system was improved. Elizabeth found herself genuinely engaged in these discussions, her legal training providing useful perspective on contracts and territorial regulations. As they crested a rise overlooking a particularly beautiful meadow dotted with blue and yellow wildflowers, Samuel reined in. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, his tone more serious. "Are you certain about this, Elizabeth?" "About staying in the West, so far from everything familiar." Elizabeth considered the question carefully. "I've asked myself the same thing many times over the past 2 weeks." "The answer remains yes," she gestured toward the expansive landscape. "There's something here that speaks to me, a sense of possibility I never felt in Boston even before recent events." "And our arrangement," Samuel pressed gently. "A marriage of convenience is not what most women dream of." "Most women haven't had their romantic dreams shattered quite so thoroughly as I have," Elizabeth replied with a rueful smile. "I find I prefer our honest understanding to false promises of undying passion." Samuel studied her, his expression thoughtful. "Yet you deserve more than mere practicality." "As do you," she countered. "Perhaps we'll discover it together in time." Something shifted in Samuel's gaze, a warmth that made Elizabeth's heart quicken. He moved his horse closer until their knees almost touched. "Elizabeth," he began, then stopped as the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Samuel tensed immediately, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip as he scanned the trail below. 3 riders approached rapidly, and Elizabeth recognized Frank Malone in the lead. "Stay behind me," Samuel instructed quietly, positioning his horse to shield hers as the riders drew closer. "O'Malley," Malone called out, reining in a few yards away. "Thought I might find you showing your pretty fiancée the property." "What do you want, Malone?" Samuel asked, his voice level but edged with warning. "Just being neighborly," Malone replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Came to offer my congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. Word travels fast in these parts. Thank you, Elizabeth said before Samuel could respond, moving her horse slightly forward. It's kind of you to take an interest. Malone tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Miss Kincaid. Settling into Western life, I see. Yes, quite comfortably, she replied, maintaining a calm demeanor despite the tension radiating from Samuel. Good to hear, though it's a shame you won't have much time to enjoy married life. Malone's pleasant tone contrasted with the implied threat. Heard there's been Apache activity south of here. Terrible thing when they raid isolated ranches. Samuel's posture stiffened. There's been no Apache activity within 100 miles. You know that as well as I do, Malone. News travels slow sometimes, Malone shrugged. Just concerned for the lady's safety is all. Your concern is noted, Elizabeth said coolly. Though I wonder if your time might be better spent addressing the questionable property claims along your eastern boundary. I've reviewed the territorial records quite thoroughly, and there seem to be irregularities. Malone's expression darkened. You'd be wise to mind your own business, Miss Kincaid. Mrs. O'Malley in 3 days' time, Elizabeth corrected, and my husband's interests are indeed my business. The calculated use of husband wasn't lost on either man. Samuel's eyes flickered to her with brief surprise before returning to watch Malone. You heard my fiancé, Samuel said. We appreciate your congratulations, but we have plans to finalize. Good day, Malone. For a tense moment, Malone seemed poised to escalate the confrontation. Then he smiled thinly. Good day, O'Malley, Miss Kincaid. He turned his horse. Enjoy your ride. As Malone and his men rode away, Samuel exhaled slowly. That was either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both, Elizabeth admitted, her heart racing despite her outward composure. But I've found that showing weakness to men like Malone only encourages further intimidation. Samuel studied her with new appreciation. You're not what I expected, Elizabeth Kincaid. Is that disappointment I hear? Quite the opposite, he assured her, a smile warming his features. Though I'm beginning to wonder if Malone should be more worried about you than me. Elizabeth laughed, the tension of the encounter dissipating. My legal knowledge can be rather formidable when applied correctly. So I'm discovering, Samuel's expression grew serious again, still Malone is dangerous, his threats weren't idle. I understand, Elizabeth said, but I won't be intimidated from the path we've chosen. Our path, Samuel murmured, something shifting in his gaze. 3 days from now. Yes, Elizabeth confirmed, feeling a flutter of anticipation that had little to do with legal contracts or property rights. 3 days. They continued their ride in comfortable silence, each contemplating the approaching ceremony that would bind their lives together in ways neither had anticipated when first meeting. Whether their practical arrangement would develop into something deeper remained uncertain, but Elizabeth found herself increasingly hopeful about the possibilities that lay ahead. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Samuel stood before the small mirror in his bedroom, struggling with his tie, a formal Eastern accessory he rarely had occasion to wear. His hands, steady when breaking wild horses or facing down armed men, fumbled with the silken strip. A knock at the door preceded Hank's entrance. The old wrangler took one look at Samuel's predicament and chuckled. Let me help you with that, son, he offered, his gnarled fingers making quick work of the tie. Saw plenty of these during my army days. Thanks, Hank, Samuel surveyed his reflection with critical eyes. The new suit ordered from Denver for the occasion fit well enough, though he felt strange without his customary work clothes. Do I look presentable? Downright handsome, Hank confirmed. Miss Elizabeth won't be disappointed. Samuel's stomach tightened at the mention of his bride. The past 2 weeks had transformed his view of Elizabeth from a practical partner to something more. Something he hadn't allowed himself to contemplate in years. Her intelligence, courage, and quiet strength had impressed him daily, while her rare smile had begun to affect him in ways that went beyond their businesslike arrangement. Never thought I'd see the day, Hank commented, straightening Samuel's lapels. You getting hitched? Neither did I, Samuel admitted. She's a good match for you, the older man said with surprising perception. Different worlds, maybe, but same kind of steel underneath. Samuel nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him. What had begun as a practical solution to inheritance conditions had evolved into something he couldn't quite name. Not love, perhaps, not yet, but a foundation upon which something profound might be built. "It's time," Hank said, glancing at the clock. "Judge is waiting at the church with the minister." The small white church at the edge of Willow Creek was filled beyond capacity when Samuel arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the event, curious to witness the union of the reclusive rancher and the Eastern judge's daughter. Samuel stood at the altar beside Reverend Collins, fighting the urge to tug at his collar as whispers and speculation filled the sanctuary. When the piano began playing and the congregation rose, Samuel turned toward the entrance. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, her arm linked with her father's. Her wedding gown was elegant without ostentation, ivory silk with delicate lace at the bodice and sleeves, complementing her slender figure perfectly. Her honey-blonde hair was arranged in an intricate style beneath a simple veil, and she carried a bouquet of local wildflowers that Hank had gathered that morning. But it was her expression that captured Samuel completely. As their eyes met across the church, Elizabeth smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her composed features into something luminous. In that moment, Samuel realized with startling clarity that their practical arrangement had become something far more meaningful, at least for him. Judge Kincaid escorted his daughter down the aisle with dignity, though Samuel noted the slight glisten in the older man's eyes. When they reached the altar, the judge placed Elizabeth's hand in Samuel's with a meaningful look before taking his seat. "You're beautiful," Samuel whispered, surprising himself with the unplanned compliment. Elizabeth's cheeks colored slightly. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." Reverend Collins began the ceremony, his words flowing over Samuel as he struggled to focus on anything beyond the feel of Elizabeth's hand in his and the momentous step they were taking together. When the time came for vows, Samuel spoke with unexpected emotion, the traditional promises resonating with new significance as he pledged his life to this remarkable woman. As he slid the simple gold band onto Elizabeth's finger, his mother's ring, salvaged from the ashes of his childhood home, Samuel felt something shift within him, as if a door long closed had opened just enough to admit a sliver of light. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins declared. "You may kiss your bride." Samuel hesitated briefly, aware that their previous interactions had never included such intimacy. But as he met Elizabeth's gaze, he saw permission there, and perhaps something more. Gently he lifted her veil and leaned forward to place a soft, chaste kiss upon her lips. The brief contact sent an unexpected current through him, and from Elizabeth's slight intake of breath, he suspected she'd felt it too. They parted quickly, mindful of their audience, but the moment lingered between them as they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife. The reception at the town hall afterward was a surprisingly festive affair. It seemed all of Willow Creek had contributed to the celebration, tables laden with home-cooked dishes, a small band playing lively tunes, children darting between adults with unbridled energy. Elizabeth moved through the crowd with natural grace, thanking well-wishers and engaging in conversation with a genuine interest that Samuel knew would endear her to the community. "You've made a fine choice, son," Judge Kincaid said, joining Samuel near the punch bowl, "though I suspect you've realized that already." Samuel nodded. "Your daughter is remarkable, sir." "She is indeed." The judge's expression grew more serious. "I want you to know that my role in William's plan came from genuine concern for Elizabeth's happiness, after what happened in Boston." "She told me," Samuel said quietly. "Not all the details, but enough. It broke something in her," the judge continued. "Her trust, her belief in herself. I've seen that same look in your eyes, Samuel, the wariness of someone who's learned the hard cost of caring too deeply." Samuel couldn't deny the observation. "We've both built walls." "Yes, but walls that protect can also isolate." The judge clasped Samuel's shoulder. "My hope is that you'll find in each other not just practical partnership, but healing." Before Samuel could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Frank Malone stood in the doorway, flanked by several of his men. Hope I'm not too late to congratulate the happy couple, Malone called, his voice carrying over the suddenly hushed gathering. Samuel moved immediately toward Elizabeth, who stood with several local women across the room. Mr. Malone, Samuel acknowledged coldly as he reached his wife's side, I don't recall sending you an invitation. Weddings are community affairs, Malone replied with feigned joviality, and I'm a concerned citizen of this community. His gaze shifted to Elizabeth. Mrs. O'Malley, you look lovely. Marriage clearly agrees with you. Thank you, Elizabeth replied with perfect composure, though Samuel felt her tense beside him. How thoughtful of you to attend. Malone smiled thinly. I brought a wedding gift, he gestured, and one of his men stepped forward with a package. A token of my neighborly goodwill. Samuel made no move to accept it. Your goodwill was made clear during our last encounter, Malone. Now, Malone chided. That was business, this is celebration. He extended the package directly to Elizabeth, for the bride. With remarkable poise, Elizabeth accepted the gift. How generous, though I'm afraid we must be leaving soon for our new home. The hour grows late. Her diplomatic handling of the situation impressed Samuel. Malone clearly meant to intimidate, yet Elizabeth refused to show fear or hostility. Of course, Malone tipped his hat. Congratulations again on your marriage. I look forward to discussing water rights once you're settled. The implied threat hung in the air as Malone and his men departed. The celebration resumed gradually, though with a subdued quality that hadn't been present before. What's in the package? Samuel asked quietly. Elizabeth handed it to him. I'm not certain I want to know. Samuel unwrapped it carefully to reveal a silver picture frame containing a map of their combined properties, with the water sources prominently marked in red. A reminder of what he's after, Samuel said grimly. And a warning, Elizabeth added, though not a particularly subtle one. Judge Kincaid joined them, concern evident in his expression. Perhaps you should postpone your return to the ranch tonight. Stay in town where there are people around. Samuel shook his head. That would only show weakness. We'll continue as planned. I agree, Elizabeth said with surprising firmness. This is our wedding day. I won't have it dictated by threats. Her father sighed. You're well matched in stubbornness, at least. Promise me you'll be vigilant. Always, Samuel assured him. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, guests began to depart with final congratulations and good wishes. Elizabeth changed from her wedding gown into a practical traveling suit, and Samuel brought the wagon around to the town hall's entrance. Ready? He asked as he helped Elizabeth onto the seat. Yes, she replied, though he noted a slight tremor in her hand as he assisted her. The ride to the ranch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts as the wagon jolted along the rutted road. The setting sun painted the landscape in golden hues, the beauty of the frontier displayed in its most favorable light. It truly is magnificent, Elizabeth murmured, gazing at the distant mountains. So different from Boston. Do you miss it? Samuel asked. The comforts of Eastern life. She considered the question. I miss certain aspects. Libraries, concerts, the changing seasons as expressed through century-old trees. But there's a freedom here I never experienced there. She looked at him directly. I don't regret my choice, Samuel. Her words eased something in his chest he hadn't realized was tight with concern. I'm glad. Though I admit to some trepidation about this evening, she added, a blush coloring her cheeks. Samuel felt his own face warm as he understood her meaning. Elizabeth, he said carefully, our arrangement was founded on practical considerations. I don't expect, that is, I would never presume. I know, she interrupted softly. Your honor is one of the qualities I've come to admire most, but we are married now in the eyes of law and God. The implication hung between them, charged with possibility and uncertainty. We have time, Samuel said gently, to know one another better. To build trust. Elizabeth's expression softened, thank you. As they approached the ranch, Samuel was relieved to see smoke rising from the chimney. Hank had gone ahead to prepare the house for their arrival, ensuring warmth and comfort awaited the new bride. The ranch house gleamed in the fading light, transformed by fresh paint and Hank's careful attention to detail. Flowers adorned the porch and a new sign hung beside the door, O'Malley Ranch. Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley, Samuel said as he helped Elizabeth down from the wagon. Before she could respond, the crack of a rifle split the evening quiet. Samuel reacted instantly, pulling Elizabeth to the ground behind the wagon as another shot splintered wood near where they'd been standing. "Stay down," he commanded, drawing his revolver and scanning the surrounding terrain. A third shot kicked up dirt near the wagon wheel. Samuel identified the muzzle flash on a ridge about 200 yards away. "Can you make it to the house?" he asked Elizabeth, who lay beside him with remarkable composure despite the danger. She nodded. "Yes." "On my signal, run for the porch." "Don't stop, don't look back." Samuel prepared to provide covering fire. "Ready." Elizabeth gathered her skirts. "Ready." Samuel fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge. "Now." Elizabeth sprinted toward the house with surprising speed as Samuel continued firing to keep the attacker's head down. Hank appeared in the doorway with a shotgun, providing additional coverage as Elizabeth reached the porch and ducked inside. Once she was safe, Samuel made his own dash to the house, diving through the door as another bullet whined overhead. "Malone's men?" Hank asked grimly as he reloaded. "Most likely," Samuel confirmed, peering cautiously through the window. Though firing from that distance in fading light suggests they meant to frighten rather than kill. "A wedding gift from Mr. Malone, I presume," Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite her rapid breathing. Samuel turned to her in concern. "Are you all right?" "Surprisingly, yes." She straightened her disheveled clothing. "Though I imagine this isn't how most brides envision beginning their married life." Despite the gravity of the situation, Samuel found himself impressed once again by her resilience. "No, I suppose not." "I'll keep watch tonight," Hank said, moving toward the back window. "You two get some rest. Doubt they'll try anything more, but best to be careful." Samuel nodded. "Wake me in 4 hours." "We'll take turns." With the immediate danger past, an awkward awareness descended as Samuel realized they were now faced with the intimate realities of marriage. The renovated house included a proper bedroom for the newlyweds, separate from Hank's quarters in what had once been Samuel's room. "I've had your trunks brought in," Samuel said, gesturing toward the main bedroom. "You should find everything arranged to your specifications." "Thank you," Elizabeth hesitated, then asked directly, "Will you be joining me?" The simple question hung between them, laden with implications. "I'll take the first watch with Hank," Samuel replied carefully, "but afterward, if you're comfortable with the arrangement." "You are my husband," Elizabeth said softly, "and while our beginning may be unusual, I entered this marriage in good faith." Samuel studied her face, searching for any sign of reluctance or obligation. Instead, he found a quiet certainty that stirred something profound within him. "As did I," he assured her. "Rest now, it's been a long day." As Elizabeth retired to their bedroom, Samuel took up position by the front window, rifle across his lap. The night settled around the ranch, quiet now except for the occasional calls of nocturnal creatures. "She's something special," Hank observed from his post at the other window. "Yes, she is," Samuel agreed, surprised by the surge of emotion that accompanied the simple acknowledgement. "Might not have been how you planned on getting a wife," the old wrangler continued, "but sometimes the best things in life come unexpected-like." Samuel nodded, his thoughts turning to the remarkable woman who had entered his carefully isolated life just 3 weeks ago. Elizabeth Kincaid, now O'Malley, had shown courage, intelligence, and adaptability that would serve her well in frontier life. But more than that, she demonstrated an understanding of his guarded nature that no one else had ever managed to achieve. Perhaps, Samuel reflected as he watched the moonlight silver the landscape outside, his uncle's unusual bequest had been wiser than he'd initially believed. Not just in securing the ranch's future through property and water rights, but in bringing him a partner who might help heal the wounds he'd carried for so long. Whether that partnership would develop into something deeper remained to be seen. But for the first time in many years, Samuel O'Malley found himself open to the possibility. 3 months into their marriage, Elizabeth sat at the desk in what had become the ranch's office, carefully reviewing water rights documentation for a neighboring property Samuel was considering purchasing. The summer heat pressed against the windows, but inside the stone house the temperature remained bearable. So much had changed in such a short time. The combined properties now operated as a single, thriving ranch. Samuel had expanded his horse breeding program, securing a contract with the cavalry that promised stable income. Elizabeth had established herself as his full partner in the business aspects of their operation, earning respect from the local ranchers for her legal acumen and practical insights. More surprising was the personal transformation in their relationship. What had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved with unexpected speed into genuine partnership and deepening affection. Their wedding night, delayed by Malone's intimidation attempt, had ultimately unfolded with a tenderness that surprised them both, awkward at first, but increasingly comfortable as they discovered each other's needs and preferences. Now, 3 months later, Elizabeth could scarcely remember her life before Samuel. His quiet strength, uncompromising integrity, and unexpected gentleness had become essential parts of her daily existence. The walls both had built around their hearts had gradually lowered, allowing a connection neither had anticipated when agreeing to their unusual marriage. The sound of horses approaching drew Elizabeth to the window. Samuel rode in with two of his ranch hands, returning from checking the northern pasture. She watched as he dismounted with fluid grace, giving instructions to the men before turning toward the house. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, a reaction that had only grown stronger with time. When had practical appreciation transformed into deeper feeling? Elizabeth couldn't pinpoint the moment, only that somewhere between their wedding day and now, she had fallen in love with her husband. Samuel entered, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "Afternoon," he greeted her with a smile that still made her pulse jump. "Any news from town?" "A letter from father," Elizabeth replied, holding up the envelope. "He's extending his stay in Denver through August. The territorial court proceedings are more complex than anticipated." Samuel nodded, pouring himself water from the pitcher on the sideboard. "Anything else?" "Hank reports that Malone's men were seen near our eastern boundary again yesterday. No confrontation, just observing." Samuel's expression darkened. "He's getting bolder since the marshal left for Denver." The situation with Frank Malone had escalated over the past months. After his initial intimidation attempts failed to drive them from the property, Malone had turned to legal challenges, disputing their water rights based on obscure territorial statutes. Elizabeth's legal knowledge had proved invaluable in countering these maneuvers, further infuriating the land grabber. "We should consider hiring additional hands," Elizabeth suggested. "At least until the marshal returns." "Already done," Samuel confirmed. "2 men with solid reputations start tomorrow." Elizabeth smiled. "You anticipated my concern." "We think alike in many ways," he said, crossing to stand behind her chair. His hands rested lightly on her shoulders, a casual intimacy that had become natural between them. "What does the judge say about our counterclaim?" Elizabeth leaned back against him as she opened her father's letter. "He believes our position is sound. The original Spanish land grant clearly establishes priority water rights for our property, regardless of Malone's interpretations of territorial law." Samuel's thumbs worked gently at the tension in her shoulders, and Elizabeth sighed with appreciation. These small gestures of care had become frequent between them, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushed when passing coffee at breakfast, shoulders touching as they reviewed account books in the evening. "You've been working too hard," Samuel observed. "The papers will wait until tomorrow." "There's so much to do," Elizabeth protested mildly, though she made no move to continue working as his fingers continued their soothing motion. "Always is on a ranch this size." Samuel's voice held quiet pride. "But we've accomplished more in 3 months than I managed in 5 years alone." "We make a good team," Elizabeth agreed, turning in her chair to look up at him. "More than good," Samuel said softly, his gaze warming as it held hers. "I can't imagine doing this without you now." The simple admission touched Elizabeth deeply. From Samuel, a man who had built his life around self-reliance, such acknowledgement carried profound weight. "Nor I without you," she replied. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "I have something to tell you, Samuel." His expression shifted to concern at her serious tone. "What is it?" Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I visited Dr. Morgan in town yesterday. We're going to have a child." Samuel went perfectly still, his eyes widening. "A child?" "Yes," Elizabeth watched his face anxiously. In early February, according to the doctor. For a moment, Samuel seemed unable to process the news. Then, to Elizabeth's surprise, a smile of extraordinary warmth transformed his features. "A child," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our child." He pulled her gently to her feet and into his embrace. Elizabeth felt tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding melt away at his obvious joy. "You're happy then?" she asked, her cheek against his chest. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never thought, that is, I'd convinced myself such things weren't meant for me." Elizabeth leaned back to see his face. "Having a family." "Having you," he corrected softly. "Having this life we've built. A child who will grow up knowing they're wanted and protected. It's more than I ever allowed myself to imagine." The naked vulnerability in his expression touched something deep within Elizabeth. This was the man beneath the capable rancher's exterior, the boy who had lost his parents too young, the soldier who had seen too much death, the man who had isolated himself from connection to avoid further pain. "I love you, Samuel," Elizabeth said, the words she'd held back for weeks finally finding voice. "I know it wasn't part of our arrangement, but I can't help." Samuel's lips covered hers, the kiss conveying everything words could not. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he whispered. "Have for some time now, just wasn't sure you felt the same." Elizabeth laughed softly. "We're quite the pair, aren't we? Both so careful with our hearts even when they were already given." Samuel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "No more careful distance, not between us." "No," she agreed, "no more walls." As Samuel held her close, his hand moving to rest protectively over her still flat stomach, Elizabeth marveled at the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a practical solution to inheritance conditions had transformed into the deepest connection either had known, proof that even hearts wounded by loss and betrayal could heal, given the right care and companion. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the ranch in golden light, illuminating the home and life they'd built together. There would be challenges ahead, Malone's threats, the hardships of frontier life, the rigors of pregnancy and parenthood. But Elizabeth knew with bone-deep certainty that they would face whatever came together, their partnership strengthened by love neither had expected to find. In the end, William O'Malley's unusual bequest had given them far more than property or wealth. It had given them each other, and in doing so, had healed wounds they'd thought would never mend.